right, I'm going to do something that is not always fun. It's assessing an enemy, especially a long-standing tribal enemy of the Patriots, who I still have. I try not to be a fan freak and just lose my mind for my team because it's hard to be accurate that way. But boy, I still have some resentment over the Patriots. All that success, 20 years, definitely gave me PTSD. So I'm going to cover them today, guys, because I try to be accurate. Some fans just want to be told that their team is great and all their opponents are going to suck this season. And I don't like to do that. I like to be accurate. I like to cover things from a football standpoint. That's what I'm about. I usually do a thing called Know Your Enemy. And so Patriots are in our rearview mirror. They've been in there for a few years now. But when you look at them objectively, they're positioning themselves in a very good spot to become a thorn in the side of the AFC East. And that could include the Bills. Maybe not this year, depending on this draft. Everything they're doing now has been a very good trajectory if you're not paying attention. But it's going to hinge on this draft. This draft is critical for this build, especially for this year. But I'm going to cover them to show you that don't overlook them. I wouldn't say you can overlook the Jets either. We have to see a lot of stuff, but they're, I think, in a farther distance than the Patriots. The Patriots have made a lot of good moves and closed the gap. Dolphins, and to a lesser degree, the Bills have to be on their P's and Q's, or they could find themselves in trouble again if they are smart in this draft. So that's what I'm going to do here today, guys. The likes, the subscribes, the comments, and the views. It's how I stay in business. My sponsors, they see certain numbers and they say, we'll keep you, Curtis. And if not, they're going to say, goodbye, Curtis. So if you can help me out with the likes, subscribes, comments, watch as much as you can, all that stuff keeps me in the biz. I really appreciate that. So let's get into it. The Patriots overview, it starts with the cap. People will say there's no such thing as a cap. Look at the Bills. They've had to make cuts. They've moved things. They got the piggy bank of Allen. The Dolphins, there was no cap, but look how we're bargain basement hunting this year. We don't necessarily have the piggy bank. That is Allen. We have to see if Tua can stay healthy. But the cap is legit. And if you look at the Patriots, they made a lot of purchases, but they still had $81 million left this season, 46 next season over the cap, and then carry some from this year to next year. And then they got 126 in the third year. So they have tons of money despite a lot of purchases. And some of them maybe a little tad bit high. Some of them were very good. So for me, I had 6 keys for the Patriots. I'm not saying I wanted to see them, but they were the 6 keys. And for me, it was what would they do with the head coach? What would they do with the OC? How are they going to protect Drake May? Out from 3 yards per carry, talked about he'd been in the blue tent 5 times for head injuries. That is a recipe for disaster. Then the O-line. The O-line was their worst unit last year. What were they going to do with that? Then shoring up the defense, and lastly, running the football. Now, they had a decent, I'll go over the numbers. They had a decent year running the football, but when I dig in deeply, you'll see that despite the production, it wasn't very effective. It wasn't very efficient. So I'm going to get into that in a second. Now, one key is always going to be, especially for the Patriots, penalties. They were 19th in penalties last year, which is not good. And they got rid of Mayo. They brought Vrabel in. Vrabel's last 2 years with the Titans, they were middle road. But prior to that, they were number 1, number 7, and number 2. Vrabel can bring a disciplined team, and that's going to help out a lot. One little part too I wanted to mention, I should have from the beginning. The key is the owner. Everything disseminates down from the owner. I don't really have fond feelings for Bob Kraft, but he fired Belichick. He hired Mayo, didn't like what he saw, and he fired Mayo and then hired Vrabel. And so they are very serious about winning. Uh, there's some teams that just want to make money, some that just want to kind of contend and have control. There's others that really want to win. And as much as I don't like it, Bob Kraft's one of them. Hiring Vrabel for the head coach was excellent. McDaniels, OC, excellent. They've done some things to shore up the offensive line. They've done things to shore up this defense, and they're doing things to take care of running the football, and it's critical. So when you look at them last year, overriding um, offensive total yards, they were 31st. Bad. Pass yards, total pass yards, 32nd. Bad. Even worse than 31st. Rush yards, 13th, and that's where you could say, hey, what are you talking about? They need to run the football better as your top 6 keys for this season. Well, when you look at it, they were 20th least in yards before contact. They were 11th in yards after contact. The running backs were breaking tackles and doing tremendous work, but that's why you got some of these fumbles, and that's how you're going to burn your running backs out. The offensive line needs to do better, and the time of possession was 26th least, and their rush calls were only 18th, and so they weren't really efficient. They weren't giving their defense rest, and they were asking their running backs to carry this offensive line, and it doesn't work consistently. Now on defense, the total yards, they were 22nd. Pass yards, they were 9th. That's very good for a bad defense, and they did a lot of stuff to help that out. Their rush total yards were 23rd. They need to stop the run better. Some of that, I think, is because that defense was on the field a lot. And then points total was 22nd. So clearly they need to fix this defense, but this pass defense is pretty good, and they added some good stuff. And I'm going to get into their additions, and you're going to see how they did a very good job this free agency. They could have spent like fools. In some ways they kind of did, but in most ways they didn't. So they just recently signed Garrett Bradbury, the former center from the Vikings. He's a run blocker, not so much a pass blocker. They got him for 2 years, $12 million, $6 million a year. That's a fair, good deal. They get Wes Schweitzer, a guard, nice veteran to get out over there. Chason, the outside linebacker, 1 year, $5 million. Doesn't work all out. They get rid of him next year. He's a decent guy on the edge. They got rid of Andrews, but Bradbury filled that spot. They signed an old Dolphins guard. I'm not sure why. Lester Cotton, $3.63 million for 1 year. I think he needs to get stronger. If he does, he could produce, but he still needs to get stronger. Joshua Dobbs, nice little backup quarterback. Mac Hollins, physical guy, hard worker, receiver. Milton Williams, D tackle from the Eagles, good pass rusher, $25 million a year, but they got plenty of money. I think they overpaid a little bit. He's got to work on his run stop. Morgan Moses, they signed 3 year for $24 million. He's a little bit older, but this guy's an animal. He's got a Teron Armstead in him. Not as good, but still pretty good and tough. He plays through pain, so they kind of shored up that tackle spot what they had to. I thought it was a decent signing. Carlton Davis, 3 years, 54, to pair him with Gonzalez. That is going to take a 9th overall pass defense, and it's going to boost it quite substantially, and it's not forcing them to draft a cornerback in the draft. One of my favorites for them, and I wanted the Dolphins to grab him, Robert Spillane, linebacker, not the best in pass coverage, but unbelievable in run stop. But if you give him the right assignments and you set him up the right way, this guy's a stud at stopping the run. Austin Hooper, 1 year, $5 million. Harold, tight end, he can block. He's a big guy, almost 260. Harold Landry, outside linebacker. He's still got some years in him, 43 million. So it's like just under 15 million. And then Christian Ellis, 1 year, 3.6, with 3.2 million, outside linebacker. There's a lot of cheap signings that they can move off. They're not pinned in, opens up cash, and they pulled all this together. Now, for me, the offensive line was key. They got Verdan Lowe, who wasn't so good, but he's in his second year. We'll see what happens. They got Cole Strange, who's been struggling, but we'll see what happens with that. Then they got Bradbury, Onwenu, and Moses. And a guy in the background, Tyrese Robinson, only 61 snaps, but he played well in those 61 snaps. So I clearly think that they're going to have to continue to bolster this offensive line. I hope they don't. I hope they draft kicker. I hope they draft something other than that. But I'm really confident that's where they're going to go in the first 2 rounds, one spot in the first 2 rounds. Now, they got Henry and Hooper, and that's a secondary blocker to go along with this. And that goes a long way. Hooper's a good player. He's one of the better tight ends in the league, and they got him for a good deal. Not great, but good, and he's big, and to go along with Henry, he's not the best run blocker, but he's solid and a pass catcher, and that ties a lot of stuff in. If they add one more good piece in this draft, they're going to have a formidable front go along with Gibson and Stevenson, 2 good backs, big and another one pretty fast and mobile. This is how you set consistency, especially in the pass balanced league. Now, they've got some good stuff as far as their defense. I'm not going to really dig too deep into it because I think we know they got a pretty good defense. But when you look, they've got Christian Gonzalez, I talked about, Carlton Davis, and Marcus Jones. That's a 3 solid pair of corners. And then Deli Pettis had a pretty good season, only 344 snaps. He was a rookie undrafted, had a good season. And then Jabril Peppers had that offseason issue. And without him, you could see a huge difference. And with him, he's a big difference maker. And the 2 of them together are really going to set up a pretty solid safety group, along with Duggar, who could play the physical thing, along with those cornerbacks. So that pass defense is going to be pretty good. Spillane, I talked about, I like. Ellis is a solid linebacker. He can cover, he can pass rush, not the best cover guy, but they like to move guys around and put them in position. So I kind of like their linebacker situation, except it's a little thin. The DI spot, now you got Milton Williams, who's pretty tough, but then he also got Christian Barmore, who's coming. He was playing really well until he got those blood clots. How does he bounce back? If he goes back to 2023 along with Milton, that's a pretty darn good front. They got big Keon White, who's still developing. Chasen they have, and then Nafi Jennings, who's a decent run stopper, not much else, and then Harold Landry. So this defense is pretty stacked out, guys. And Vrabel knows how to call defense. And I think this is going to be a pretty tough defense if they can get the offense going. And it's going to focus around this offensive line. But again, Josh McDaniels, he's got social issues. I don't like him, but this guy can call offensive plays. Unbelievable at calling draws. He's unbelievable at calling small route combinations to pick things up. He's got the touch. He's a special OC. He took, what's his face? What was the crazy guy they drafted a couple? Mac Jones. And he almost had him into a contention to be, a really good quarterback year 1. And once he was pulled out of the mix, Mac Jones crumbled. But if he could take Mac Jones and get something out of him, what can he do with Drake May, who I think is a very good quarterback? And what you're seeing here is almost sort of like a mimicking of what the Bills are doing with Allen. I'm not saying May is Allen. I'm not saying that. But there are shades. He can move. He's big. He's got a big arm. And they're putting together what it looks like an offensive line to keep stability, a defense that he doesn't have to score tons of points, and the ability to run this football. Now, again, it comes down to the draft. They have some big picks. I think they're going to go offensive line, or maybe Travis Hunter, who can play receiver and cornerback. I don't know. He's a little small. He's a tweener. He could be brilliant, or it could be like, meh. To me, Membo would be the pick. Will Campbell, I do like him, although some people, Chris Kaufman, who I respect a ton, thinks he'll be moved to guard. I think he could play right tackle maybe. There are some things to his game that are lacking, although guy's got some serious confidence, some grit, and he's got mitts. But if you're picking the two, Membo, I think probably is going to be the guy. I think they're going to go offensive line and then maybe receiver in that second round. But maybe they go one of the top receivers at 4. I just think that with the offensive line, with Drake May and guys like Moses, who's older and a little bit of a question, Bradbury, who's older, maybe he's not going to be around so long, Strange, who's a question, Lowe's a question, you got to add some answers. I think if they get this thing fixed up on the offensive line, they can test the Dolphins for that second spot if the Dolphins don't draft well. The Dolphins must draft well. I think the Jets are going to be scrappy. The Bills, I don't think they could test the Bills, but they could take one. They almost took a game last year. So, guys, overall, the Patriots, nobody in the division likes them. But they have done pretty much everything on my checklist except for nailing this draft. So if you're a Pats fan, you should be hoping like heck that they nail this draft. And if you're not, you should hope that they wet the bed and draft a kicker with the first round pick, because I think they're headed in the right direction. Not saying Super Bowl this year, not saying taking the division. They might end up third in the division, but I think they will give teams a lot more problems and maybe problems of losing games if they can get this draft right. Anyway, Curtis saying, be well. I'd say go Fins, but this is a Patriots thing. But I'll say it anyway. Go Fins. Curtis out.